Hello, welcome again to our ASEAN Social Good Forum. This is part two. We are going to talk about the role of millennials in helping build a more inclusive ASEAN region through innovation, technology, and social media. We're surrounded by millennials, so later on, after we hear our speakers, we're going to hear hopefully questions from them and insights based on their experiences. Okay, joining us in this panel is Katrina Chan, the Executive Director of Cubo, Philippines. Percy Sendanya, the former Commissioner of the National Youth Commission. And two sisters, brilliant sisters, are also joining us. Founders of Ears by Innovable, Christina and Pauline Guanzon. Welcome to the ASEAN Social Good Forum.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start with you, Christina and Pauline, because your story is quite inspiring. You've innovated something which helped you personally, but you scaled it up and then helped others. Can you tell us your inspiring story?
Okay, so first, EARS stands for Early Action Response System. It's a safety wearable device for the deaf and hard of hearing, which alerts them of any oncoming threats from behind or beyond their line of sight, and it also alerts their loved ones in case they're in trouble. So Christina will tell you how it began.
Yeah, EARS, it was based from my personal experience. Because of that, I was born deaf. So I'm wearing hearing aids, and up until now I'm wearing hearing aids, but then I can speak because I'm growing up with my family. They talk to me, and I can read lips. So, but the challenge there for me was communication problems because I cannot hear well. And then also I commute. So when I commute going to school, I will walk alone, and then I wasn't aware that there's somebody shouting at my back behind me, or there's a car or a tricycle approaching. Random strangers will just pull me to the side, or they will just shout at me, curse at me for like not taking it seriously. So with EARS, that became my focus to help myself commute easier without having my parents to worry about me, because I want to be independent. I don't want to rely on other people. I just want to be like, I can do what everyone else can do. So I was not thinking about myself, I was thinking more of other people who are like me, because I haven't seen people who are were not able to work, disabled. Person with disability, walking by them on their own, being on their own. And I know how it feels like being dependent on somebody else. So I wanted to create a device that helps them be more independent, make them to lift up their spirits, to look for more opportunities to become who they want to be. So that's EARS.
And now it's a full-blown social innovation. How is it helping the community of people with disability?
Well, right now we're in the middle of our development and manufacturing. So last year, after Christina made this as her college thesis, she decided to pursue this, and we entered Idea Space, and we were one of the top 7 last year. Okay, so anyway, so with the help of Idea Space and the many doors that Idea Space was able to open for us, we're developing it now. So by next year, we will be launching, and we're able to work with the different communities, particularly in the Visayas and in Manila. So we work with PADS in Cebu, we work with the College of St. Benil, the Philippine School of the Deaf. So all these organizations that really help the deaf and hard of hearing community.
Okay, thank you, Pauline and Christina. Well, Katrina, I think you at some point you were involved in the project or your organization. Can you tell us more about your intervention as far as innovation is concerned?
So I actually encountered EARS through Idea Space, right? So it's a private accelerator that assists startups from, taking their ideas and really turning it into a business. And right now my role is with Kubo. So it's QBO, but it actually stands for the Bahay Kubo, which is a very Filipino concept, right? And it was all about bayanihan. So in Idea Space, we take 10, 15 startups in any given year that are trying, and not just social enterprises, but really across industries. But there's so many more startups that really want to be able to access networks, resources, like all sorts of things, right? To really have like that community behind them, startup community behind them. And in Kubo, that's what we're trying to replicate, to create that sort of collaboration, I like to call it, that bayanihan spirit, right? And to be able to help more startups, right? Just like Ears, to turn their ideas into reality, and even for startups already existing, to be part of that whole network so that we can all work together to, you know, create better, bigger startups and really have kind of game-changing large enterprises coming from the Philippines, really starting with these, you know, ideas, you know, these millennials with their innovations, right? So I think it was great, like, you know, working with Ears in, you know, from the very beginning, knowing that there was, you know, seeing that there was so much passion there and like, you know, really ideas, but then what was needed was, again, just access to networks, you know, resources, even like the right tools and frameworks to think about how do you grow your startup, right? And if you could kind of scale that concept, right, from a very humble Kubo again, or from an idea to something bigger, and if you could have more people access that, that's really what you're trying to achieve at Kubo.
You mentioned passion, which is common among social innovators, but what makes millennials stand out? Percy, you've worked with young leaders across time.
Thank you for clarifying that I'm not a millennial anymore.
What's your observation?
In Filipino, I have this word called pasaway, which would translate in English as unruly, the refusal to follow rules, and I think that's what's powering up millennials now, that sense of being pasaway, to accept the status quo as it is. Because with millennials now, you can't just give them a problem and tell them that this problem has no solution. They would always be pasaway and find some solution to that problem, or chip some element from that problem and come up with a solution. And that's what we've been seeing in my experience with the 10 Accomplished Youth Organizations. Young people refusing to accept that this problem cannot be solved. Young people stepping up to the challenge and coming up with this bold, crazy, most of the time solutions to problems that, you know, the elders have already given up on.
Tumatango kayo. Do you agree? What particular characteristic can you identify which you think has helped you move your project forward?
Well, one is Christina, because it was born out of her personal frustration, no? And this was what she turned into her motivation to really not accept anymore the circumstances as they were. She refused to be put into a box just because she was deaf. And, you know, being a person with disability, it's really not about that they're not less, but they're different. So they have their own gifts and they have their own things to offer. So they really wanted to, she herself really wanted to prove that she's not just this, that she can do so much more. And we want also that other persons with disabilities to have the same opportunity.
Along the way, what challenges did you face before you were able to scale up?
Many challenges. For one, being millennial women and millennial woman person with disability. Also, we encountered many challenges, especially people who would put us down. But on the other side, there are people who would also build you up. So examples of this would be Ms. Kat, and then Idea Space, and all the other people that we encountered along the way. Also, the other challenge really is that this particular environment really wasn't designed for persons with disabilities. So that's really what contributes to being disabled rather than being deaf or blind or being in a wheelchair, because the environment is the one that really causes these barriers or prevents people or excludes people from all these other opportunities that would otherwise have been open to them. So the other challenge really is also finding the right people to work with, also coming out of our shell, because we were also pretty sheltered, because the deaf, Christina being deaf was like, you can only do these things. So we're also trying to break the mold. so to
Pasaway.
speak. Yes.
Pasaway.
Katrina, how do you link up innovators? How do you spot talent and potential?
How do you spot talent? I mean, I think if people had the answer to that, right, like we'd all be billionaires for like investing in the next Ubers. No, but okay, so there are a few things, right? I think one is, being pasaway is like a key thing, right? Like we look for innovators that, again, fall in love with the problem as opposed to the solution. Because like your idea, there's so many ideas, right? And there's so many kind of, inventions people fall in love with, or innovation, so to speak. But it's really like the entrepreneurs that are able to tap into or really understand the problems and kind of validate with their customers that tend to enjoy success, or like are able to execute on a solution that can really make an impact. So I think that's one thing that we look for. And in terms of like how we help them, they're really I think just in the same way, the Philippines is kind of an archipelago and physically fragmented, right? I think a big thing that we're trying to solve, not just in the Philippines, but in ASEAN, is really kind of creating networks, right? So this was touched on in the earlier panel also, where collaboration is very important. I think so we have a lot of these we do a lot of puns in Kubo, so we do a lot of Q programs, right? And there are things like kulitan sessions or workshops and basics, but really at the core of all these things is we try to bring together resources or expertise or mentors, right? Or, just get people to kind of work together, and that's really where like potentially magic can happen, right? So I think that's a big element for success, especially in the ASEAN region or in places like this where maybe the infrastructure isn't quite there yet or isn't
Correct.
advanced.
That's why which leads us to the next question. Percy, because we're holding this on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit, but do you hear your voice being heard in the formal summit? Is it actually in the agenda, do you think?
Well, earlier in the year, during the 50th anniversary celebration, there was this Young Social Enterprise Recognition Ceremonies for outstanding achievements of young people in ASEAN, innovators and social entrepreneurs. And I think that was the time when the spotlight was on young people. And I hope that the discussions during that time is also guiding the discussions now. Because during that time, young people were saying that, as was mentioned, we have to come up with more innovative solutions to problems that we have been not paying attention too much on. For example, there's a particular group in Malaysia working with matching communities with the right water technology for potable water. And water is a very important human resource and a human need. And in most cases, duty bearers will just give up on the solution and let people take care of themselves. And yet there's this group of young people, I'm not sure if it was Malaysia or Singapore, working on matching people and technologies. If we can just invest more on this and put more resources and not meddle into how things are being done, because the problem with innovation, and most of the time once government assumes control over something that has been innovative the past a year ago or 2 years ago, when government assumes it takes a different form, which lessens the effectivity of a certain initiative. So I think the key here is investment and let young people run programs, because we have seen successes in other ASEAN countries. And I think the Philippines is also one interesting experiment for that. For example, take the case of one of the ASEAN Tayo winners. ASEAN Tayo is the ASEAN 10 Accomplished Youth Organizations a few years back, called Angat Kabataan of Taytay Rizal. They were just appropriating some technology from Japan in cleaning waterways. And this is the case of the Maningning Creek in their locality, wherein 3 or 4 generations of government officials have given up on the problem, until one day young people said, no, we don't want to die in a community where there's a dirty creek in the middle of the community. So they tried to look for solutions, and I'm sure no government official, whether national or local, will go to YouTube to find a solution to a problem. And that is what these young people did until they discovered the technology of Bokashi balls. So what we did during that time in the NYC was to organize collaboration and partnerships between Angat Kabataan and other partner ASEAN youth ministries. And this is where collaboration could happen, which could further enrich the already existing innovation.
It's a case where young people themselves are creating spaces for all their innovations to thrive.
I mean, I guess I just want to add to that. So not everyone knows that Kubo is actually a government-supported initiative. Yeah. So the Department of Science and Technology and Department of Trade and Industry, like we're actually located in a DTI building, for example. And I think it's a good example of where the government is creating that environment and trying to support and listen to the innovators, right, directly from them. But at the same time, it's run by guys like me, like we're millennials, right? Good. So I think there's definitely a role that government can play, that governments in general can play, right? And they also add a lot of sort of experience and kind of when you're thinking about really scaling an operation at a country level, then of course like that's what you need. But at the same time, like it's being open to the work of the millennials and really having them kind of take the lead and how to move this forward is so important.
Since you mentioned that, let's discuss governance and innovation. Is the environment, the policy environment, enabling young people develop their innovation? So let's take questions from the audience. If you have a wish, if you will be talking to one of the leaders among the ASEAN countries and even Justin Trudeau and other leaders, what would it be if you have a wish? A policy wish. Which can help you innovate.
If you have 15 seconds with one of the
Justin Trudeau.
Okay. Start with you.
I think sorry. Yeah, my name is Hannah.
Hi, Hannah.
Yeah, hi, hello. One thing, it's because I'm in a waste management issues. I think we should need like a regulation about segregating our waste, because when we do segregation, there are 80% that we can reduce to the landfill, because in most, like in Indonesia, all the waste goes to a landfill and nobody care about that. Yeah, I think
that would be a very interesting question for PM Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, indeed. Other questions? Policy wish? Yeah. Please introduce yourself and your organization, then ask your question.
So hi, I'm Kay Ruelo. I'm from Upstart in Ateneo. And I suppose like one wish I would have towards policymakers is like, I wish they'd require students, especially those geared towards taking business courses, to gear their businesses around social change and social involvement. Like, people have this notion that success and social change are two exclusive ideas, but I wish that there would be a subject that requires business students to think about them as a joint idea, a joint goal. So yeah.
Are you sure you want this required? Will require you Math 100. Other questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Alfie. So I have a hardware startup, so it's more like about hardware. Because what I wish for the government, so like you said, there's people, the millennials have their patient and innovative to try and to solve, but most of them also require the facilities. So like right now there's a lot of like co-working space, but like for hardware startup, we're not only need the space, but also the facilities, the component, and also the tooling. Yes, and for right now, especially like in Indonesia and what I see in many Asian countries, they doesn't really have that. If you compare with like US or China, we can have a rapid prototyping, and it will be help a lot. And I think it will be really nice if we have that kind of ecosystem, so we can make it more faster and also more innovative.
Don't we have that?
You guys have experience with hardware prototyping?
Yes.
Okay, tell us more about it.
We've also encountered the same challenges that, well, now it's pretty young here, although there is already. So it's still it's still in its baby stage.
How exactly does that work?
Because you have to keep on prototyping, iterating based on what your market really needs. So we've gone through so many iterations before we can actually get to our manufacturing build, and before we can go to our manufacturing run, and before we can
He's
go to
excited.
market.
Yeah.
So exactly, right?
And
He feels you very
the
much.
minimums are usually quite high,
The
right?
minimums are quite
pain
high
point.
unless you go to China, but then being in a family business that does manufacturing, we want to keep it local, and but then we also want to keep also the protection issues and all of that. But then as we're still trying, still going for it, and then the good thing is that people are ready for it, and it's already starting here, so we just have to sustain that.
So
I think you should partner,
Yeah.
you two. You can relate with each other.
At what stage do you think would government or state support would best come in at the whole process?
Well, now DOST actually has already started this. I guess there's not that much awareness yet. So one is awareness, and then also to really listen to what is really needed, because they provide all these things, but then it might not necessarily fit or exactly fit
to the
what is actually needed. So more listening on both sides, I guess, and then more involvement. That's one thing we learned along the way. Nothing about us without us.
That's a good.
Yeah.
Nothing about us
Without
Without us.
Okay.
Okay.
Emphasizing the importance of collective
Yes.
leadership and efforts.
Yes.
Any other questions? From Malaysia. From Malaysia, Philippines, Brunei.
Roll call.
Other questions? Okay.
I'm Erica from Exchange. I love the topic. And I just wanted to ask, what are you most excited about as we're building towards a more inclusive ASEAN? Ashan, sorry, Ashan.
What makes you optimistic?
Yeah.
What am I most excited about?
More inclusive ASEAN.
Wait, let me gather my thoughts. Okay. What I'm most excited about is that people all over the world are coming together and share their ideas. And then from there, we can pick up the ideas and collaborate. What I'm looking forward is to collaboration. Because it starts with collaboration that can go forward solution to the future. That's what we're looking forward. Because we want it to change. Everybody wants a change in the future. We want to move forward, not backwards. So that was the main.
I really
theme,
love the
yeah.
theme actually of the partnering for change
Yeah.
for ASEAN, because
Yeah.
I feel like when you're looking at millennials, it's really a borderless thing, right? Like I feel like millennials from around the region share a lot of characteristics. Like
But that's something that our millennials have yet to realize.
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Like I don't think they realize that they have so much in common. Like a Filipino kind of startup or entrepreneur has so much in common with someone in Brunei that's
Yeah.
like potentially working on the same big problems, right? So I guess it's a cool thing. Also, I work with a lot of startups and millennials like in the Philippines, and not just here actually. I've gotten to speak with a lot from around the world, and they're I was sharing this earlier, like they're woke, right? Like I think that's a very common
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
about this generation, where they're so aware of like big important issues. They're not just kind of doing photo filters
Yeah.
anymore. They're really solving like
Yeah.
water and sanitation and waste management, like or access to information. And when you're looking at millennials from in a borderless kind of world, right, working together on these big problems, then they can create really powerful things. It's not just kind of hyper local stuff anymore, but really the scale that you can achieve when you find your counterparts. So when you have like events like these, right, where you have the millennials from everywhere working together, who knows what can happen, right? But I think there's so much power in that.
And social media plays an important role in connecting
Absolutely.
people.
Yeah.
So based on your experience, how did the medium help you? Because as you know, it's quite toxic. Now.
noisy.
Very noisy, and it can destroy, but it can also build. So in your experience, how did it help you thrive?
Well, in our experience, it helped us really find the deaf communities that we needed to work with. The deaf community is actually very, very,
Very
active
active,
on social
yeah.
media. So we were able to reach a great number of them. So we work with them. they help us along with our validation, iteration, all of these things. And then it helps that we connect with all of them so we can really hear what their problems are, how we can solve it. And then once we solve it, what happens next? Because once we get them out there with our device, we want them to study, we want them to work. So it led to education opportunities, it led to employment opportunities, so on and so forth. So it's a really end-to-end thing, or a systemic thing that, as Ms. Terry was talking about earlier.
How did you deal with the noise? I understand it's quite noisy, but did it not discourage you at some point?
We had to, it was hard learning how to sift through that noise. Because there are also so many different voices talking to you. There's people who would say that they believe in you, but then would have ulterior motives after all, or people who would just discourage you. But then you really just have to stand firm on your why and really know your purpose, have the passion for it, and then the perseverance and the patience, really. A lot of patience. And then after that, the how and the who may change along the way, but really stand firm on your why.
Okay. Percy, because you're dealing with organized group individuals, what particular tips can you give them so that their innovations can be scaled up and also supported by the government?
Well, one of the criteria actually that we use when we evaluate programs and projects for the 10 Accomplished Youth Organizations eventually is also replicability. So how do you develop a franchise for a certain idea? How can you replicate it in other contexts? And I think one of the most important bottom lines that we would mention with our partners is that try to imagine your program in a different context, in a different place. If it still works, then it is an even more brilliant idea. So I think this is where imagination and collaboration will play a big role. For example, now we have a program that we supported in Mindanao wherein they were supporting cultural integrity for young Moro children. And if we can replicate that, say, in the north, in the Cordilleras, I think the replicability and the franchise would greatly help in elevating the discourse on indigenous Filipino culture. So this is about young people collaborating with their peers and going beyond their usual circles and also expanding their network. And I think this would be easier done now with social media. It would be most effective and efficient now at this particular point. And the opportunity is there, so they just have to maximize that opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. The next challenge is to expand your efforts. How do you plan to do that? Katrina, across the region, for instance, is that your vision?
Absolutely. So I think Kubo at its core is always Filipino, but at the end of the day, how do we facilitate both, right? Filipinos being able to go and scale globally, but also how to make Philippines part of that entire kind of global ecosystem, right? So the talent can easily come here also, so that people can set up here and grow their businesses here. And there's so many things that we can do from an infrastructure level, also from an awareness level, right? So I think there's still many places around the world where they see the Philippines or even ASEAN as kind of backwater. They don't realize that there's so much talent here working on things, right? But the Philippines just had its first unicorn startup, right? So we are doing cool stuff here. And we recently, for example, completed the Philippine Startup Report with Pricewaterhouse. And it was a staggering number. It's 95% of over the 100 startup CEOs and founders surveyed felt like they would be able to expand beyond the Philippines in the next 3 years. And that they're looking to do that. So I think there's definitely interest. Again, the young entrepreneurs, they understand that it's a bigger world out there, and the role that we can play in terms of facilitating and making that happen, whether it's working with multinational organizations or the government, right? And it's also working with the founders themselves and also helping them think bigger. I think there's so many, again, ways that you can go about it, but that's definitely part of the roadmap. And I think, that's really the only way that the startup ecosystems can grow, is if we all kind of work together and, again, partner for change.
Okay, and now the takeaways before we end the discussion. Perhaps tips to our young innovators, how they can further develop their ideas and turn them into concrete actions that will help solve problems in our society and address sustainable development goals, reach sustainable development goals. Maybe beyond your respective innovations, can you cite a particular story or innovation which inspired you or moved you, which in turn inspired your particular project?
What inspires me from other innovations?
Yeah, yeah.
That inspired.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, not exactly innovation. It's more of like solving the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what inspired me, what I watched a documentary last year, and then there was a chef. His name is Massimo, in a small town in Italy. And then one day there was a big earthquake, so it destroyed everything. And they have one factory. It consists of, I think, 100,000 of Gouda cheese. And then, but the problem is, it's a small town in Italy. They cannot rebuild. So what Massimo did was, he used his own talent and passion and creativity, that he just said, okay, I will make an open recipe, which is risotto, out of Gouda cheese.
Okay.
And then he sent it worldwide. And because of that, people like from Japan, Australia, ordered every single thing of their Gouda cheese. And with that, he rebuilt the whole Italy, that whole sea town. So that was, because of one man thinking basic math, basic solution, he helped the whole town. So just thinking that simple can change the whole.
Inspiring indeed. Percy.
2 years ago, one of the winners of the search for the 10 accomplished youth organizations was nominated to the ASEAN Tayo, and they were also selected as one of ASEAN's accomplished youth. They're called the Gualandi Project of Cebu, and I'm partly inspired now by your story. They're a group of young people who works with the deaf community because they discovered that apparently there's a very high incidence of sexual abuse among the deaf. Yeah. So,
Quite high.
and when they were looking at the problem, one of the main drivers of the concern is that most people in the police force, in the justice system, they don't know how to sign. So the deaf, they just get discouraged and they just ignore what happened and do not report. So what these young people did was to learn how to sign and then volunteer in police precincts. They're an on-call signing volunteer so that people from the deaf community can report and their cases can be processed. And now they're observing a decline in sexual abuse among the deaf community in Cebu City. And this is about young people refusing to say that, you know, this problem cannot be solved because young people found the solutions and the solutions were themselves.
The kind of social impact that we want to feel on the ground. Okay, Katrina?
So again, there are so many examples, I guess, that I've seen or worked with, right? And it's not just guys that are explicitly social innovations or social impact, like, which is a great place to start, but also other companies that are really, you know, have indirectly created social impact. So in idea space alone, you could talk about Cropital and AdTech or InvestEd doing like education. You have like Lendo or Quickwire and financial inclusion. There are like hundreds of startups I could think of immediately. But honestly, like if you ask me what inspires me, it's you guys, right? It's the social innovators and entrepreneurs themselves. It's not easy to start up. Like when you're looking at a place like the Philippines, our region, right? There's so many barriers, the resources are so scarce, right? And yet you're still working hard at it, right? And for me, that's what inspires me to keep going at this. Like, guys, keep doing it, keep doing what you do, keep disrupting, keep figuring out the solutions to the problems, and you know, you will break through, right? I mean, and it's okay to fail. I think that's one thing to also remember, right? It's as long as you learn from it, maybe you pivot, maybe you do something else, right? But that whole experience of iterating and like keeping going, right? And I guess innovating with purpose. I think that's really what we're all kind of going for, and yeah.
Okay, yan ang maganda nating pag-isipan. Something to ponder on as we go back to our respective countries. Thank you for joining us. Katrina Chan, Executive Director of Cubo Philippines. Percy Sendanya, former Commissioner of National Youth Commission, and Christina and Pauline Guanzon, founders of Ears by Innovable. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.